Okay, we're going to go ahead and get logged into our fabric here. You can see that the fabric is up and discovered. Everything looks healthy there. Now we're going to come over to our fabric and our access policies. If we take a look at our drawing here, you'll see that we've got to create our switch profiles and selectors, our interface profiles and selectors, and then our pools, our domains, our AEPs, then tie it together. Now, there were a couple of things that we left out of the previous video. One is we didn't really discuss the difference between VPC and NXOS and VPC and ACI. So real quickly, just so you're aware, in NXOS, we have this concept of a peer link and a peer keep alive. And I don't want to say we don't have that concept in ACI, but they don't function in the same way, and you don't configure them at all. Effectively, ACI uses the fabric itself as its peer keep alive and its peer link. Okay, so you're never going to cable between the two leaves that are in a VPC domain. We don't do that. And in fact, if you tried, it would just error disable those connections through the MCP or miscabling protocol. So if I come into the switch policies and I come into the profiles, okay, you'll see I've already got some profiles created. I literally just right click and create a leaf profile. And we'll come back and we'll take a look at that in a minute, but I just wanted to show you where that was at. The other thing is under switch policies and policies, and you'll see that there's a VPC domain policy that's defaulted. If we want to expand and take a look at that actual policy, there's virtually nothing here. You could just use this default policy, no harm, no foul. As you'll see later when we're doing interface policies though, I tend to never use defaults if I explicitly call them in an object. So I'm going to go ahead and create VPC domain Paul. It's going to exactly mimic the other one. Why do I do that? Well, down here under the virtual port channel default, these are what they call protection groups. And I need to create a protection group down here. And I'm going to go ahead and create one. This is what's going to take care of for us the concept of the peer keep alive and the peer link. Okay. Here I'm just calling that policy that I created before. Okay. As to why the domain is 201, well, I'm about to select the switches, and I'm going to select 201 first and 202 second. Okay. So I typically use as the domain, this is like the VPC domain ID. Okay. I just use the leaf number of the lowest number leaf in the pair. That's also going to be whichever one is switch one is going to be the VPC primary. Okay, so when I hit submit here, okay, and you'll see it assigns a virtual IP. This is coming out of the TEP pool or the tunnel endpoint pool, and this VTEP that we have here, that is what's handling things like our peer keep alive and peer link type traffic. So it's really just utilizing the fabric for those features. This creating the VPC domain policy and the VPC protection group, this is not something you do every time, and that's why I don't have it on the drawing. Okay, because it's not done every time, I just didn't see a reason to put it on there. You really only set the VPC domain policy one single time when you bring up your fabric and never touch it again typically. You need to create a protection group every time you have a pair of leaves that you want to group together in a VPC domain. So it's usually once per pair of leaves that are together. Okay, so if I added leaf 203 and 204, I'd probably come back in here and create a protection group for 203 and 204. That the logical pair ID would be 203 in that case. And when I created it, you would see that it would get a virtual IP assigned. The next item we're going to come down to is the interface profiles. So I have some profiles already set up for 201 and 202, but let's make a profile for leaf 201 and 202. Okay, and let's select our interfaces. Now, you can make your VPC as many interfaces as you could in NXOS. So for LACP, that's up to 16 interfaces. I've never seen one that big. But in our case, let's keep it simple. Let's say that we're going to hook up, in our case, a storage array. It's going to connect to port E11 on leaf 201 and leaf 202. So typically I would name it this, and you might say, well, Jason, why don't you call it, int E1/1? Well, that's because when I put in that slash, you'll see this little red exclamation comes up. It's an illegal character. I wish you could put it in there, but you can't. However, you can put it, in fact, you have to put it down here. Okay. Now, if you wanted more ports than just one, you can also do the dash down here. Okay. And but in our case, we've just got it's hooked up to port E1 on leaf 201 and 202. Interface ID is 11. I'm going to leave the interface policy group blank for right now. We haven't created it. And with my methodology where we're kind of following this, you're going to notice that we do have to revisit some screens. I do that rather on purpose so that you're used to creating an object and being able to go back and verify once in a while. Okay? Once you know what you're doing, you do it however you need to do it. You can take all the shortcuts you want. And I absolutely don't have a problem with them. I don't have any heartburn with that whatsoever. But for right now, we'll just do it this way. By the way, you'll note that these other two leaf profiles, they don't have any interface selector created. These are empty objects. These are objects that have, these are container objects that don't contain anything yet. I could add something in here if I had something that was connected to only leaf 201. And I could add something in here if I had something that was only connected to leaf 202. But in our case, the only one that has something is the leaf 201, 202 interface profile. That's my interface profile. Now let's come down and take a look at the pools. Remember the VLAN pools, right? Pools in VLAN. If I right click, I get to create a VLAN pool. We'll call it pool-storage 1. However you want to name it is how you should name it. I just would highly recommend that we stay really consistent. Allocation mode, you might recall, we can do dynamic if we're connected to a hypervisor. We could do static if we're not. Since I'm connecting to some kind of a storage array, it's probably not a hypervisor, so I'll go ahead and select that. And now I need to add some VLANs in. Maybe I have one VLAN only for my storage, in which case my range would go from 600 to 600. Maybe I have more. Maybe I go from 600 to 606. Now, for the allocation mode, it defaults to inheriting the default allocation mode from above. That's absolutely fine. It's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. For whatever reason, just my OCD kicking in, I always match the local allocation mode to the parent. Pardon me. So, if it doesn't have to, if it mismatches the local setting on the encapsulation block, takes precedence. Also understand if I start off with VLAN 600 to 606 for my storage lifts, I'm not tied to only 600 to 606. I could come in at a later date and edit this. I could add other VLANs so that I don't have to always be contiguous, right? If I hit submit here, I could come in, open it up later, add a second block, and maybe now I want to add VLAN, 399 to 399. So now I've got, a trunk set up, or I'm going to have a trunk set up that has VLAN 399 and 600 to 606. And likewise, if I want to take something off, I can just highlight it and delete it. Okay? So that's my pool. So now I've got my VLAN pool set up. Next step was the domain. And again, we have physical domains, we have L2 externals, L3 externals, and then we have virtual domains. And you may wonder, like, why isn't there a virtual down here? Well, it's because it's up here under the VM networking tab. That's going to be out of scope for right now. So we're just going to stick with a FIDOM, or a physical domain, which I usually call a FIDOM. Many people do. It's not just me. So FIDOM. Oops. FIDOM. And here, I'm going to select that pool that I created. And now these two objects, the domain and the pool, are linked so that when I create my AEP and I pull in my domain, the pool comes with it. Okay? And you're going to see that sort of behavior in ACI a lot as we go on. So if I hit submit here, okay. The next item was my AEP. The AEPs are up under global. And the first thing you'll notice is it's Attachable Access Entity Profile, or AAEP, but most people just call it an AAP or an Attachable Entity Profile. They leave out the access. The access is kind of implied. So here I'll call it AAP-storage1. And what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to go ahead and add in that domain that we created, the FIDOM. Okay. Note I can't fill in the encapsulation. It's not even a drop down. I can't do it. But when I hit update, it pulls in the encapsulation automatically. And it's important to note, if you went back later on and you changed your VLAN pool to add in that VLAN 399, it would automatically update in the AEP. You don't have to come back and reattach those things. Okay, they're just taken care of. So when you update one object that's linked to others, that update propagates throughout your fabric. That's part of the benefit of why we are switching to fabric-based networks, right, is for propagation of configuration. So now when I hit next, I'm going to leave out the EPGs. I'm going to leave out the interfaces for right now. Again, once you get used to it, you can do it however you want to do it. And in fact, it's totally fine. And in fact, once you kind of figure out the flow that best works for you, if you come up here, you can do the API inspector. So you show API inspector. You could use that to build out your automated flow through some kind of XML. Okay? Out of scope for here, but just so you know where it's at. Okay, so now we have our AEP set. So the next item was our interface policies. And as I mentioned in the other video, there's quite a few of these. Okay? And just like I did with the VPC domain, if I'm going to explicitly call a policy, I don't like to call the default. This was good advice given to me. They had mentioned, that as ACI matures and new versions come out, some of those defaults may change over time. And that's why if you're calling a policy, they didn't like to call the default. If you're not even calling the policy, meaning you're not using it effectively, then it kind of is what it is. But when I'm going to explicitly call a policy, I like to actually name it explicitly. Okay, so CDP on. I might also want to call CDP off. In that case, the admin state's disabled. I submit. And that second policy for off is the identical policy to the default. So I'll do a few more policies just so we get the feel for it. I'll go a little bit faster. And we'll also do a port channel policy. And we'll make it LACP active. So I usually do my port channels. And by the way, if you click up here, you can navigate all the way across for all these different objects if you want, okay? So those are the policies. Now let's create a policy group. This one's a little different. When I right-click on policy group, I can create a bunch of different types. In our case, we're going to create a VPC policy group. So it's important because that way the policy group knows that it's for VPC. It's expected to span across 2 switches. So int PG is usually my abbreviation for policy group, interface policy group, that is. And maybe you do something like that. Int PG storage 1. I've been calling a lot of the objects storage 1. And then in this case, I'll say VPC. That way it's just very easy to sort or find if I'm looking for things, particularly as you get a little more further down the road and you might start doing some things through XML or something. You might have to sort through some things. Maybe I want CDP on. Maybe I want LLDP off. And I'm going to want my LACP. And here's where we do the AEP. This is unfortunate placement in my opinion. It's right in the middle of all these interface policies, and they have the AEP. That's where I associate the domain, the profile, and the AEP with the policy group. But it is what it is. That's just where they placed it, not where I would have put it, but no one asked me. So we're going to go ahead and submit. So now I've created my pool, I put it in my domain, put it in the AP. I took the AP, I attached it to the policy group. I need to take that policy group now and put it back in a profile. Remember I said we're going to be revisiting a few items a couple of times, and here's one of them. Here is where I'm taking that policy group and now I'm attaching it to interface 1.1 for the profile, interface profile on leaf 201, 202. Okay. And you would think that's it, but we have one more step, and that's up here when we come into our leaf profiles. I'm going to create a leaf profile. And basically, this is what I'm doing to now create the actual VPC, as you're going to see, right? So I'm going to take switch profile, leaf 201, 202, storage 1. My leaf selectors. Oops. Helps if I click in there. For my blocks, I'm going to select leaves 201 and 202. And now I'm going to take that policy group. Oh, nope, sorry. I'm going to hit update here. I'm sorry, I want to be on this one. And here I associate that interface profile with this switch profile that I'm creating right now. Okay? There we go. And here we see this is, we can kind of drill down in here. Okay. Okay, and so now we see kind of this last step shows us everything. So we've got our leaf selectors, 201 and 202, right? Profile selectors, okay, for 201 and 202. We don't have any modules. These are not modular switches. And don't forget that earlier we had come up and we had set our VPC domain and our virtual port channel protection group, and that has that logical pair ID 201. Why do I bring that up? I bring that up because after you've configured all this, you want to know, is it working? And there's two ways to find out. You could log in through the CLI. The commands are similar but slightly different. Another way is to come over into Fabric and Inventory. Expand your pod, expand one or both of your leaves, expand your interfaces. Take a look at your VPC interfaces. This 201 is referring to the VPC domain. Okay. Now, a quick note about the system I'm on. I'm on an ACI simulator currently. And so I don't really have anything that's connected to port 11 on leaf 201 and 202. The steps are correct, but we're not going to find anything coming up because I don't have a storage array that's connected over there. I wish I did. But note that you can keep kind of drilling down. So the VPC domain is 201. It turns out in this case, the VPC ID is 684. Here's the name of the policy group, right? Here's the interface on those two switches, right? Or in this case, sorry, this one switch, 201. And you can get all this information. Now, again, this is not going to be populated because I'm on this virtual simulator. But normally you're getting information at every one of these levels, okay? And this is a pretty fast way to actually do your troubleshooting, okay? The other thing is you could always go into faults if you're having problems. In our case, we know what the problem is. There's nothing on port 11. So my VPC is good, but there's nothing there, so I'm going to get some errors, and I'm not going to be able to see much. Anyway, that's it for configuring VPCs, really for configuring interfaces in general. If you wanted to do this exact same thing but on just a single leaf, it would be a very similar item. We'd still create our AEP, we'd still create our domain and our profile. It's just that when we came into our interface policy group, or sorry, interface profile, it wouldn't go under the VPC interface profile. It would go under one of these, right? I'd create an access port selector. Oops, no, I wouldn't. Sorry. I would come in here. I'd create an interface selector that was just on leaf 201 in this case, and then come back, and when I created my policy group, I would create an access port policy. Okay, so it's very similar. I think you get the feel for it. If you have any questions, please let us know. And I think this will probably wrap up the ACI for Network Engineers series. If you do have other items that you would like to see, go ahead and let me know, and I'll see what I can do. The only other thing I could think of is I might do something with a troubleshooting section later on, but I'd have to figure out how I would do that. I can't do it as easily in a simulator, so I'd need to get a hold of a real fabric with some actual hosts on it, and we could play around with how to track down where a host is at with the endpoint tracker, which is a great tool, atomic counters, items like that. But that requires me to have an actual physical fabric with physical hosts on it.